Hello, my name is Madison, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about wedding drama. You know that moment when you realize someone you trusted has been plotting against you for months? Well, imagine discovering that on what was supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. Picture this. It's 3 days before my wedding to the love of my life, Ryan, and I'm standing in my future mother-in-law's kitchen in suburban Denver, Colorado, holding a phone that's buzzing with notifications. Text after text, each one more damaging than the last. Screenshots of conversations I never had, photos doctored to look compromising, and social media posts designed to paint me as someone I'm not. All traced back to one source, Natasha, Ryan's ex-fiancée. Now, I should probably mention that Natasha wasn't just any ex. She and Ryan had been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months, and their relationship ended just 18 months before Ryan and I met at a coffee shop in downtown Boulder. She was a marketing executive at a tech startup, known for her strategic mind and, as I was about to discover, her complete inability to let go. The thing is, I'm not the type of person who backs down from a fight, especially when someone threatens my happiness. I'm a project coordinator for a construction company, which means I'm used to dealing with problems, managing timelines, and making sure everything goes according to plan. What Natasha didn't realize was that by targeting my wedding, she had just declared war on someone who specialized in complex logistics and damage control. As I scrolled through message after message designed to humiliate me in front of our wedding guests, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was about teaching someone a lesson they'd never forget. And lucky for me, I had just discovered something about Natasha that she definitely didn't want the world to know. Let me back up and give you the full picture of how we got to this point, because context is everything in a story like this. Ryan and I met 2 years ago at Rooster and Moon Coffee in Boulder on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was there early, reviewing blueprints for a commercial renovation project, when this guy in a navy flannel accidentally knocked over my carefully organized papers while reaching for sugar. Instead of just apologizing and walking away, he spent 20 minutes helping me reorganize everything, asking thoughtful questions about my work. That's Ryan for you, genuinely interested in people, always willing to help, sometimes a little too trusting for his own good. Our relationship progressed naturally. 6 months of dating, moving in together after a year, and then the proposal last December at Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs. Ryan had planned this elaborate sunrise hike, but I figured out what he was doing when he kept checking his pocket every 5 minutes and insisted we stop at every scenic overlook. Still, when he dropped to one knee with that vintage emerald ring he'd spent months hunting for, I cried like a baby. Throughout our entire relationship, Natasha had been lurking in the background like some sort of relationship ghost. She'd comment on Ryan's social media posts with inside jokes, send him LinkedIn updates about mutual connections, and even showed up at his company's holiday party last year. Ryan, being the diplomatic person he is, tried to maintain a polite distance. "She's going through a rough time," he'd say. "Her career's demanding, and she doesn't have many close friends." I tried to be understanding, really I did, but there's a difference between being cordial with an ex and allowing them to infiltrate your new relationship. The breaking point came 6 months ago when Natasha started dating Marcus, Ryan's college roommate and current business partner. Suddenly, she was at every group dinner, every weekend barbecue, every social gathering, and she was watching me. I started noticing little things. How she'd steer conversations toward Ryan's college years, times when they were together, how she'd mention restaurants they used to frequent or bring up memories that pointedly excluded me. She had this way of making subtle digs disguised as compliments. "Madison, that dress is so brave. I could never wear something so bold." Or, "It's amazing how different Ryan's taste has become." The real red flag came 3 months ago during Marcus's birthday dinner at a steakhouse in downtown Denver. Natasha spent the entire evening taking photos, which seemed normal enough until I realized she was strategically positioning herself to look like she and Ryan were together in every shot. When Marcus posted them on Instagram, it looked like a double date between couples. That night, I told Ryan we needed to have a serious conversation about boundaries. He agreed, admitting he'd been uncomfortable but hadn't wanted to create drama in their friend group. We decided he'd have a direct conversation with Marcus about keeping professional and personal boundaries clear. But Natasha was apparently done playing subtle games. Wedding planning had begun in earnest, and with it came an escalation in her behavior that I should have seen coming. Planning a wedding while working full-time is challenging enough without someone actively trying to sabotage your efforts. But that's exactly what started happening as soon as we sent out save the dates in February. It began with small disruptions that could easily be dismissed as coincidences. Our caterer received an anonymous complaint about our menu choices, claiming we were planning to serve undercooked poultry. Our venue coordinator got a call from someone claiming to be me, asking to move the ceremony time by 2 hours. Our photographer's assistant received detailed instructions about shot lists that I'd never discussed, including specific requests to exclude certain family members from photos. Each incident required phone calls, explanations, and damage control. I'd spend my lunch breaks sorting out these mysterious miscommunications, getting increasingly frustrated, but not yet connecting them to a single source. Ryan suggested we might have an over-eager wedding planner or confused vendor, but we were handling most details ourselves to save money. The incidents escalated in March. Someone created a fake social media account using photos stolen from my Instagram and began messaging our wedding guests with confusing information about venue changes, dress codes, and gift registries. The account looked legitimate enough that several people actually showed up at the wrong location for our engagement party. That's when I started keeping a detailed log of every disruption, treating it like I would any construction project where things kept going wrong. I documented times, dates, methods of contact, and patterns of behavior. What I discovered was methodical harassment designed to create maximum stress while maintaining plausible deniability. The breakthrough came when my cousin Jessica, who works in cybersecurity, helped me trace the IP addresses behind some of the fake communications. They all originated from the same area in downtown Denver, specifically from a building that housed several tech companies, including Natasha's startup. But having suspicions and having proof are two different things. I needed to catch her in the act, and more importantly, I needed to understand her endgame. Was she trying to break up Ryan and me, ruin our wedding day, or was this just the desperate behavior of someone who couldn't accept that their relationship was over? I got my answer during our bachelor and bachelorette parties in early May. Ryan's friends had planned a weekend in Breckenridge for skiing and drinking, while my bridesmaids and I went to a spa resort in Pagosa Springs. Everything went perfectly until Sunday morning, when photos started appearing on social media. Someone had been at both locations, taking pictures designed to create a narrative. Photos of Ryan talking to other women at the ski lodge bar, cropped to remove context. Pictures of me having what looked like intimate conversations with the male spa staff when I was actually just asking for directions to the restroom. The photos were posted anonymously on a gossip Instagram account with a significant local following. The captions were devastating. Trouble in paradise? Bride and groom caught in questionable situations just weeks before their wedding. Within hours, the posts had dozens of comments and hundreds of views from people we knew. That's when I realized this wasn't just about disrupting our wedding. Natasha was trying to destroy our relationship entirely, using social media as her weapon of choice. She understood that in today's world, perception often matters more than reality, and she was betting that enough doubt and speculation would plant seeds that could grow into real problems between Ryan and me. But she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated both my determination and my resourcefulness. Because while she was busy playing these elaborate games, I was gathering intelligence that would soon turn this entire situation to my advantage. After the bachelor and bachelorette party incident, I knew I was dealing with someone far more calculating than I'd initially realized. This wasn't emotional revenge, it was strategic warfare. So I decided to fight fire with fire. I took a week of vacation time and approached this like any other project that needed troubleshooting. First, I created a timeline of every incident, cross-referencing them with Natasha's social media activity, work schedule, and known whereabouts. The pattern that emerged was both impressive and terrifying. She had been planning this campaign for months, possibly since our engagement announcement. Every disruption was timed to create maximum stress during critical wedding planning phases. The fake social media accounts were created using burner email addresses and VPN services to mask their origins. The anonymous tips to our vendors were made using voice-changing apps and prepaid phones. But the bachelor party photos revealed something important. She had enlisted help. There was no way she could have been in two locations simultaneously, photographing both events. Someone else was involved, and I had a pretty good idea who. Remember Marcus, Ryan's business partner who was dating Natasha? I started paying closer attention to his behavior during our weekly group dinners. He was always on his phone, always volunteering to help with wedding logistics, always asking detailed questions about our vendors, timeline, and guest list. Under the guise of being a supportive friend, he was gathering intelligence for his girlfriend. The confirmation came when I decided to test my theory. I casually mentioned during dinner that we'd changed our florist and were now working with a boutique shop in Aspen. It was completely false information, but within 48 hours, that new florist received an anonymous complaint about my payment history and credit rating. Now I had proof of not just who was behind the harassment, but how they were getting their information. More importantly, I realized that Natasha's behavior suggested she knew something about Ryan that I didn't. Something that made her confident she could win him back if she just destroyed me effectively enough. That's when I decided to dig into Natasha's own life. And what I found was fascinating. Her social media presented the image of a successful, happy woman who had moved on from her past relationship. But a deeper investigation revealed cracks in that facade. She'd been fired from her previous job for falsifying client reports, something she'd managed to keep quiet during her transition to the current startup. Her current relationship with Marcus was largely performative, based on LinkedIn posts I found from her private account, complaining about having to play nice with him for strategic reasons. Most interesting of all, she had been telling people, including mutual friends and professional contacts, that Ryan had cheated on her and that their engagement ended because of his infidelity. She'd constructed an entire victim narrative that painted her as the wronged party and Ryan as untrustworthy. But I knew Ryan. I'd seen his phone records, his email history, his credit card statements during the background check required for his security clearance at work. He was exactly who he appeared to be, honest, faithful, sometimes conflict avoidant, but fundamentally decent. Natasha's story was fiction designed to garner sympathy and justify her behavior. The real breakthrough came when I connected with Elena, Ryan's ex-girlfriend from before Natasha. She and Ryan had remained friends, and when I reached out to ask about the timeline of his relationships, she shared something crucial. Ryan had tried to break up with Natasha 6 months before their engagement ended, but she had threatened to harm herself if he left. He felt trapped, Elena told me over coffee. She had convinced him that she was fragile, that leaving her would destroy her career and mental health. When he finally got the courage to end things, she made his life hell for months. Anonymous complaints to his boss, fake reviews of his freelance work, harassment of his family members. He only got free when she started dating someone else and needed to maintain her public image. Suddenly, everything made sense. Natasha wasn't trying to win Ryan back because she loved him. She was trying to maintain control over a situation that had slipped away from her. And she genuinely believed that if she could just prove I was unworthy, Ryan would return to the familiar dysfunction of their previous relationship. But knowledge is only powerful if you know how to use it effectively. Armed with this new understanding of Natasha's psychology and methods, I realized I had two choices. I could confront her directly and hope she'd stop, or I could use her own tactics against her. Given that direct confrontation hadn't worked for Ryan in the past, I decided on a more strategic approach. The key was giving Natasha exactly what she thought she wanted, while ensuring it would backfire spectacularly. So I started feeding her false information through Marcus, using their intelligence gathering system against them. It began with small tests. I mentioned that Ryan and I were having second thoughts about the wedding venue, that we were concerned about the cost and considering a smaller ceremony. Within days, Natasha had shared this insider information with several mutual friends, positioning herself as someone who was still close enough to Ryan to know intimate details about his relationship. Then I escalated. I created fake text message conversations between Ryan and me, discussing problems that didn't exist, concerns about our compatibility, arguments about finances, second thoughts about marriage timing. I left these conversations open on my phone during group dinners, knowing that Marcus would report back everything he observed. The brilliant part was that Natasha began tailoring her harassment campaign around these fake problems. If I suggested Ryan and I were fighting about money, she'd arrange for expensive wedding vendors to suddenly demand payment up front. If I implied we were having trust issues, she'd create situations designed to make Ryan look unreliable or secretive. But each manufactured crisis only made Ryan and me stronger, because he knew they were external attacks, not internal problems. We started treating the disruptions like a game, working together to identify and neutralize each attempt at sabotage. Our communication improved, our teamwork solidified, and our relationship actually benefited from facing these challenges together. Meanwhile, Natasha was becoming increasingly desperate and sloppy. The anonymous harassment escalated to include late-night phone calls, fake emergency messages sent to my parents, and even attempts to hack my email accounts. She was spending hours each day managing this campaign, and it was affecting her job performance and personal life. That's when I discovered the perfect pressure point: Natasha's professional reputation. She worked for a startup that prided itself on ethical business practices and positive workplace culture. Their website featured testimonials about their commitment to integrity and respect. More importantly, they were in the middle of a major funding round, seeking Series B investment from venture capital firms known for their thorough due diligence processes. I realized that if I could document Natasha's harassment campaign and connect it to her professional identity, the consequences would be swift and severe. Tech startups, especially those seeking investment, cannot afford employees whose personal behavior reflects poorly on company culture. So I began collecting evidence with courtroom-level precision: screenshots of fake social media accounts, recordings of anonymous phone calls, documentation of every vendor complaint and false report. I traced IP addresses, documented timestamps, and created a comprehensive file that clearly established a pattern of harassment originating from Natasha's workplace and personal devices. The beauty of this approach was that I didn't need to prove intent or motivation. The evidence spoke for itself. Someone was engaging in systematic harassment using company resources during work hours in ways that violated multiple policies and potentially several laws. But I needed the perfect moment to deploy this information for maximum impact. And as luck would have it, Natasha was about to provide exactly the opportunity I needed. 3 days before our wedding, she made her biggest mistake yet. The wedding week had arrived, and I was feeling surprisingly calm despite the months of harassment. Ryan and I had developed such efficient systems for handling Natasha's disruptions that each new attempt barely registered as more than a minor inconvenience. Our vendors knew to verify any changes directly with us, our families were aware of potential fake communications, and our friends had learned to ignore anonymous social media drama. But Natasha interpreted our resilience as evidence that she needed to escalate even further. Monday morning, I received a call from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Someone had filed a report claiming that Ryan was involved in domestic violence, providing specific details about alleged incidents and injuries. The deputy who contacted me was professional but thorough, explaining that they were required to investigate all such reports seriously. "Ma'am, I want to be clear that we're not making any assumptions here," Deputy Martinez explained. "But someone provided detailed information about multiple incidents, including dates, times, and descriptions of injuries. We need to speak with both you and Mr. Davidson as part of our investigation." The false report was sophisticated, incorporating real details about our relationship timeline, living situation, and social activities, but fabricating a narrative of abuse that painted Ryan as controlling and violent. Someone had clearly invested significant time in creating a convincing but entirely fictional story. While I was dealing with the police investigation, Ryan was at work facing his own crisis. Someone had submitted an anonymous tip to his company's HR department, claiming he was under criminal investigation for domestic violence and suggesting that his security clearance should be suspended, pending the outcome. By Tuesday, both situations had been resolved. The police quickly determined that the domestic violence report was fabricated, lacking any corroborating evidence or witness statements. Ryan's HR department, after speaking with the sheriff's office, confirmed that the anonymous tip was based on false information. But the stress and humiliation of these accusations had accomplished exactly what Natasha intended, creating chaos during what should have been a joyful week. That's when she made her fatal error. Tuesday evening, at our rehearsal dinner at the historic Pinehurst Country Club in Denver, Natasha showed up uninvited. Not as Marcus's guest, he wasn't even there, but claiming that she'd received an invitation through a mutual friend who couldn't attend. She arrived looking devastated, with red eyes and a story about having just discovered that Marcus had been cheating on her. Several wedding guests, unaware of the background drama, immediately surrounded her with support and sympathy. She positioned herself as the heartbroken victim who bravely came to celebrate her ex-boyfriend's happiness despite her own pain. It was a masterful performance, designed to create awkwardness and shift attention away from Ryan and me on what was supposed to be our special evening. But I recognized it immediately as psychological manipulation, the same victim narrative Elena had described from Ryan's past relationship with Natasha. Instead of confronting her directly, I did something unexpected. I invited her to stay. "Natasha, I'm so sorry to hear about Marcus," I said, approaching her with genuine-seeming concern. "But I'm glad you came tonight. Ryan would want you here, especially if you're going through a difficult time." The confusion on her face was priceless. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She'd prepared for confrontation, anger, or jealousy, but not gracious hospitality. In front of all our guests, she couldn't refuse my invitation without looking petty or suspicious. So she stayed, and I made sure she was seated at the head table with the wedding party, where everyone could see her. I asked her to speak about Ryan and their friendship, encouraging her to share positive memories and well wishes for our marriage. What she didn't realize was that I had turned our rehearsal dinner into a performance space where she was the unwitting star. Every word she spoke, every tear she shed, every gesture of wounded dignity was being carefully observed by people who now had context for her behavior. Because earlier that day, I had finally decided to deploy the evidence I'd been gathering. But instead of going to the police or her employer immediately, I had shared everything with a select group of people. Our mutual friends, including several who worked in Denver's tight-knit tech community. By the time Natasha arrived at the rehearsal dinner, whispers were already circulating about her harassment campaign, her fake social media accounts, and her attempts to sabotage our wedding. The sympathy she was trying to generate for her breakup with Marcus was being filtered through a new understanding of her character and methods. She had walked into a room where her audience was no longer neutral, and tomorrow, at our wedding, she would discover just how completely her world was about to change. Saturday morning dawned perfect. Clear Colorado skies, temperature in the mid-70s, and absolutely no last-minute vendor emergencies. For the first time in months, my phone was quiet, and I took that as a good sign. I was getting ready at the Omni Interlaken Hotel in Broomfield with my bridesmaids. enjoying mimosas and the kind of relaxed morning that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. My hair was perfectly styled, my dress fit like a dream, and for once, I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes for signs of sabotage. "You seem different today," my sister Jenna observed as she helped me with my jewelry. "More peaceful? Like you're not waiting for the other shoe to drop." She was right. I felt calm because I knew that whatever happened today, I was finally in control of the situation. The evidence was compiled, the key players were informed, and Natasha had unknowingly sealed her own fate with her performance at the rehearsal dinner. The ceremony at the Denver Botanic Gardens was everything we'd dreamed of. Ryan looked incredible in his navy suit. Our families were beaming with pride, and our friends had clearly decided to focus on celebration rather than drama. Even the threat of Natasha potentially disrupting the ceremony had evaporated. She was nowhere to be seen during the vows, and I felt genuinely grateful for her absence. But peace doesn't last when you're dealing with someone as persistent as Natasha. She arrived at the reception fashionably late, dressed in a stunning white cocktail dress that was inappropriate for a wedding, but perfectly calculated to draw attention. She'd brought a date, some guy I'd never seen before, and was clearly planning to make her presence felt during the party. I watched from the head table as she worked the room, approaching different groups of guests with her carefully crafted story about Marcus's betrayal and her own emotional struggles. She was positioning herself as the brave, heartbroken woman who'd risen above her pain to support her dear friends on their special day. Several of our guests, particularly those who didn't know the full story, were responding exactly as she hoped. She received hugs, sympathetic conversations, and invitations to join various groups for photos and conversation. For a moment, I wondered if my carefully laid plans were going to backfire. Then, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Jessica. "Check Twitter, it's trending." What I saw made me smile for the first time all day. Someone, I suspected one of our tech industry friends who'd received my evidence file, had created a Twitter thread documenting Natasha's harassment campaign with screenshots, timestamps, and detailed analysis. The thread was titled, "How to Spot a Narcissistic Ex, a Case Study in Digital Stalking." The thread had gone viral within the Denver tech community, being shared and commented on by hundreds of people who either knew the players involved or recognized similar patterns from their own experiences. Natasha's professional network was seeing real-time evidence of her systematic harassment, complete with proof of her using company resources for personal vendettas. But the real bombshell came during dinner service, when Marcus himself arrived at the wedding. Not as a guest, he'd declined our invitation months earlier, but looking for Natasha with obvious urgency. I watched from across the reception hall as he found her at a table with some of Ryan's college friends, pulled her aside, and began what was clearly a heated conversation. Her face went from confusion to shock to panic as he spoke, gesturing toward his phone and shaking his head with obvious anger. Later, I learned what had happened. Marcus's business partners at the startup had seen the Twitter thread and recognized the IP addresses and timestamp patterns from their own security logs. They'd realized that Natasha had been using company computers, phones, and internet connections to conduct her harassment campaign, potentially exposing their company to legal liability and reputational damage. Her immediate termination was effective as of Friday afternoon, but Marcus had only found out about it Saturday morning when he received angry calls from investors asking why their startup employed someone engaged in cyberstalking and harassment. The relationship between Marcus and Natasha had been strategic from the beginning, but learning that she'd jeopardized his business while lying to him about her activities was the final straw. He'd come to the wedding to confront her publicly, in front of all the mutual friends and professional contacts who'd witnessed her victim performance. The conversation ended with Natasha storming out of the reception, her carefully chosen date following awkwardly behind, leaving Marcus to explain to curious onlookers what had just happened. The rest of our wedding celebration was everything we'd hoped for: dancing, laughter, heartfelt toasts, and the kind of joy that comes from overcoming adversity together. But the real satisfaction came from watching Natasha's carefully constructed facade finally collapse under the weight of her own actions. The weeks following our wedding were surreal. On one hand, Ryan and I were floating in newlywed bliss, sharing thank you notes and wedding photos with family and friends. On the other hand, we were watching the spectacular fallout from Natasha's behavior play out across Denver's social and professional circles. The Twitter thread about her harassment campaign had evolved into a broader conversation about workplace ethics, digital stalking, and the ways that personal vendettas can cross professional boundaries. Several prominent figures in Denver's tech scene shared the thread with commentary about the importance of thorough background checks and character assessments when hiring. Natasha's termination became public knowledge when her former startup's CEO published a blog post about maintaining ethical standards and protecting company culture. While he didn't name her specifically, the timing and details made it clear what had happened. The post was shared widely as an example of how personal behavior can impact professional reputation. But the consequences extended beyond just losing her job. The evidence file I'd compiled had made its way to several other startups where Natasha had interviewed for positions. Denver's tech community is surprisingly small, and hiring managers talk to each other about candidates, especially when there are red flags about character and professional judgment. Marcus, meanwhile, was dealing with his own professional cleanup. While his business partners didn't hold him directly responsible for Natasha's actions, they'd implemented new policies about personal relationships and information security that were clearly inspired by the incident. His relationship with Ryan, which had already been strained, was effectively over. The most interesting development came 3 weeks after the wedding, when I received a LinkedIn message from a woman named Andrea, who worked at a marketing firm in Seattle. She'd seen the Twitter thread and realized that a candidate they'd recently hired, Natasha, had likely lied on her resume about the circumstances of leaving her previous job. We specifically asked about any workplace conflicts or disciplinary actions, Andrea wrote, and she assured us there were none. But based on what I've seen online, that clearly wasn't true. We're in the process of reviewing her employment, and I wanted to thank you for documenting everything so thoroughly. It turned out that Natasha had managed to find a new job quickly by presenting herself as the victim of workplace discrimination and personal harassment. She'd crafted a story about leaving Denver to escape an abusive situation, positioning her termination as retaliation for reporting misconduct rather than the result of her own behavior. But in today's interconnected world, the truth has a way of following people, especially when it's well documented and easily searchable. Her new employer, after conducting their own investigation based on the available evidence, terminated her during the probationary period. Ryan initially felt guilty about the extent of the consequences Natasha faced. "Maybe we should have just confronted her directly," he said one evening as we watched the sunset from our apartment balcony. "This seems like it's destroying her entire life." I understood his compassion. It's one of the things I love about him. But I also reminded him of something important. She made these choices every step of the way. For months, she had opportunities to stop, to redirect her energy toward moving forward with her own life. Instead, she chose to escalate, to involve other people, to file false police reports. The consequences she's facing aren't punishment. They're the natural result of her own actions. The truth is, I don't take pleasure in Natasha's professional difficulties, but I also don't feel responsible for them. She created a pattern of behavior that was bound to catch up with her eventually. All I did was document it and ensure that people had accurate information when making decisions about their professional and personal relationships with her. The real lesson from this entire experience isn't about revenge or justice. It's about the power of systematic response to systematic problems. When someone is harassing you in a calculated way, emotional reactions and direct confrontation often just escalate the situation. But methodical documentation, strategic information sharing, and allowing natural consequences to unfold can be much more effective. 6 months later, Ryan and I are stronger than ever, having learned that we work well as a team when facing external challenges. Our marriage wasn't damaged by Natasha's attempts at sabotage. It was strengthened by the process of overcoming them together. As I finish telling you this story, Ryan and I have been married for 8 months, and life has returned to a peaceful normal that we never take for granted. We still live in Denver, we still love our weekly dinners with friends, and we still occasionally run into people who remember the wedding drama, as it's become known in our social circle. The most satisfying outcome isn't that Natasha faced consequences for her behavior, though I won't pretend that wasn't gratifying. It's that Ryan and I learned we could handle a serious challenge together, without it damaging our relationship or compromising our values. We didn't become cruel or vindictive people in response to cruelty directed at us. We just became more strategic and more committed to protecting what matters to us. I occasionally wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen a different response, if I'd confronted Natasha directly or simply tried to ignore her harassment. Maybe the situation would have resolved itself eventually, or maybe it would have escalated even further, but I'm confident that documenting everything and allowing her actions to speak for themselves was the right approach for us. If you're dealing with someone who's systematically trying to disrupt your happiness, remember that you have more power than you might realize. Document everything, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to let other people see the full truth of what's happening. Sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that actions have appropriate consequences. What's your take on this whole situation? Do you think I handled it the right way, or would you have done something differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and if you've dealt with similar drama in your own life, please share your story. You never know who might need to hear it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.